I hired him as my wardrobe consultant, not realizing he's an alpha king werewolf romance audiobook. The wind tore through the alleyways like a living thing, slicing at Seraphine Vale's face with icy fingers that bit harder than any memory she carried. Each step was agony against the slick cobblestones, her ankle throbbing beneath her as if protesting the very act of survival. She pressed herself against the shadowed brick wall, gasping, ears straining for even the faintest echo of pursuit. Her coat, torn and sodden, clung to her like a half-forgotten promise of warmth that had abandoned her when she needed it most. Every heartbeat was a drum of fear in her chest, a warning she could not ignore. The storm overhead shrieked through the narrow streets, an unrelenting symphony of chaos that mirrored the turmoil within her. Her breaths came sharp and ragged, mingling with the icy mist curling around the dim street lamps. She could see only silhouettes dancing in the fog, shadows that seemed to stretch and twist just beyond the edge of reason. The city around her had become a labyrinth of danger, each turn promising both salvation and death. A faint glow flickered across her palms, silver and restless, a pulse of light that throbbed with the rhythm of her panic. She had felt it before, glimpses of a power she could barely control, a spark she was both terrified and drawn to. The fire burned, bright and unyielding, yet she could not command it. It leapt and danced like a phantom, teasing her with what she might become, and the realization clawed at her like frostbite on bare skin. Power without mastery was a curse more dangerous than any hunter in the alley. The shadows shifted again, moving with purpose. She swallowed the lump in her throat and pressed herself closer against the brick, knuckles digging into the wet stone. The echo of footsteps, sharp, deliberate, spiked her pulse. She wasn't alone. She never had been, not truly. Something watched her, something that knew her, that sought her out. And she had nowhere to run. A gust of wind slammed into her, whipping the tattered hem of her coat around her legs and pulling her hair into her face. She spat out a strand of wet hair and tried to steady her breathing, but the storm wasn't the only thing she was running from. She could feel it now, in the pit of her stomach, crawling along her spine. The sense of being hunted, the undeniable weight of danger closing in. Each echo, each shadow, each whisper of movement was a threat she could not yet name. Her pulse thudded in her ears, drowning out everything else, and then, there, a sudden silence. The storm seemed to falter for a heartbeat, as if the world itself held its breath. Seraphine's chest rose and fell in frantic rhythm, eyes darting through the fog as she tried to anticipate the next move, to prepare for what she could not yet see. That heartbeat of silence was dangerous, more dangerous than the storm, more dangerous than the shadows, because it carried a promise. Someone, or something, was coming. The glow in her palms flared again, brighter this time, betraying her presence. Her fingers curled instinctively, trying to hide it, but the silver flame refused to be contained. Panic surged, a raw, visceral thing that made her teeth ache and her lungs burn. She wanted to run, to vanish into the storm, but her body betrayed her, stiff and trembling. She had always been running, from her past, from her power, from the people who had sworn to protect her and then cast her aside. And now, for the first time, she felt the eyes that had been following her for days, weeks, months, focusing solely on her. She barely had time to register the low growl that vibrated through the mist before it echoed into a deeper, more terrifying sound. Footsteps that were not human, steps that carried both weight and authority. Her muscles tensed, every nerve screaming to move faster, yet her legs felt leaden, as if the very cobblestones sought to trap her. She wanted to scream, to call for help, but the words caught in her throat, thick and bitter as the rain. From the corner of her eye, movement, a shadow detaching from the fog, solidifying into something impossibly tall, impossibly commanding. The figure stepped closer, and the street lamps glinted off dark hair slicked by rain, sharp features carved like stone, eyes that seemed to pierce straight through the storm and into her soul. Fear gripped her like a vice, but so did something else, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, the fragile, trembling spark of trust. Her silver flame pulsed again, sensing him before she even understood who or what he was. She could feel it, deep in her bones, that this presence was not ordinary, that he was more than a man. And yet, he didn't move to harm her. Instead, he paused, watching, calculating, a shadow of a smirk ghosting across his lips. Something in his eyes promised both danger and protection, a paradox that made her chest tighten in a way she had long ago sworn to avoid. She tried to make herself small, to vanish into the mist, but he spoke, soft, deliberate, carrying the weight of authority and a strange warmth that made her ears burn. "Seraphine Vale," he said, and the sound of her name on his tongue sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the storm. Her heart stopped. How could he know? She had been careful. She had been silent. And yet, here he was, speaking her name as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Panic roared in her chest, silver flames spiking, and for a terrifying moment, she considered fleeing blindly into the darkness. But something in the sound of his voice, something in the way he moved, confident, controlled, aware of every shadow and every threat, made her hesitate. The shadows at her back shifted again, closer this time, and she realized with bone-deep certainty she could not face them alone. Not now. Not ever. And the truth, bitter and unwelcome, slammed into her chest. If she wanted to survive the storm, if she wanted to see another sunrise, she would have to trust him. Her breath caught in her throat, and she felt the wet stickiness of rain on her cheeks as her knees threatened to buckle. The silver flame in her palms surged uncontrollably, reacting to the fear that coursed like electricity through her veins. She tried to calm it, tried to rein it in, but the raw power was untamed, a creature in itself, hungry and dangerous. She was standing on the edge of everything she had ever feared, and everything she had ever wanted. And then, as if reading her very thoughts, the shadowed figure stepped forward, closer, until the warmth of him brushed against the cold of the storm. Every instinct screamed to recoil, to flee, but she was rooted, trapped in a moment that stretched impossibly long, every heartbeat loud in the rain-filled silence. He was both danger and salvation, and she could not tell which terrified her more. Her hands shook as she glanced down at the glow fading, her own power retreating into the corners of her body like a cat frightened by a stranger. She realized in that instant that she was exposed, not just to the storm, not just to the shadows, but to the fact that she had no control over her own life, her own destiny. And yet, for the first time in as long as she could remember, she didn't want to run. "Stay behind me," he murmured, voice low, commanding, filled with an authority that did not demand obedience, yet she felt compelled anyway. And with those words, everything changed. Fear mingled with an unfamiliar spark, trust, fragile but unbreakable, and she realized the storm was not the enemy tonight. The storm was the stage, and he, this unexpected alpha in human guise, was the first step into a world she had been denied. Her pulse raced, but it was no longer fear alone. It was anticipation, trembling and raw, a dangerous hunger that made her shiver despite the icy rain. Somewhere deep inside, the spark that had always been hers, the silver flame, the mark of her lineage, stirred, sensing that this night, this storm, would change everything. And then, with a sudden gust that tore through the alley like a living beast, the moment was broken. Footsteps came again, louder this time, and shadows twisted with a purpose that screamed of danger. She glanced up at him, eyes wide, and he nodded, a silent promise that he would not fail her. Not tonight. Not when the fire in her hands was just beginning to awaken. "If you think you can leave now, just know some hearts won't survive the next twist." Subscribe now to Florence Werewolf Romance Collection. Or watch others be swept into darkness without you. And don't forget to comment the country you're watching from. Let me see who's brave enough to face the storm with us. Her gaze swept the alley, fog curling around her ankles, rain plastering her hair to her skin. The storm was relentless, the shadows unyielding, but for the first time, Seraphine Vale felt seen. And that glimpse of recognition, that breathless awareness of something far larger than fear, was enough to hold her in place as the first tendrils of destiny began to coil around her like a living thing, ready to pull her into the unknown. Lucian Ashcroft stepped from the shadows like a phantom carved from the night itself. Rain-slicked hair clung to his jawline, dark eyes glinting with a dangerous calm that made Seraphine's stomach knot and her pulse spike. He moved with a confidence that demanded attention, every step precise, deliberate, echoing against the narrow alley like a heartbeat of power. She froze where she stood, the silver flame in her palms flickering nervously as if recognizing him not just as a presence, but as an inevitability. Seraphine Vale, he said, and the weight of her name on his tongue was heavier than the storm around them. There was no question in his tone, no hesitation, only certainty. The way he spoke it, it was as though he had been holding it in his chest for years, waiting for this moment, waiting for her to notice him, to acknowledge the bond that she had yet to understand. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. Fear, shock, awe, each emotion collided within her in a cacophony of heat and ice, twisting her stomach. Before she could gather her senses, the shadows erupted with movement. Figures emerged, sleek and predatory, their eyes glinting red in the fog. Rival pack wolves, sent to intimidate, to hunt, to corner her. Panic surged, but Lucian didn't flinch. He didn't hesitate. The world seemed to narrow to him and her, every other sound, every other threat muted by the focus in his gaze. He stepped forward, and suddenly, the danger wasn't overwhelming. It was a challenge, a puzzle, a threat he could contain, as long as she stayed within his orbit. Her instinct screamed at her to run, to flee blindly into the storm, but a part of her, the part that had been starved for protection, starved for understanding, stayed rooted. She couldn't move because, deep down, she understood. He was the only chance she had of surviving this night. The alley became a stage for a silent dance of predator and protector, and she was caught in the center, trembling, exposed, burning with fear and something else. Something dangerous, something she couldn't yet name. Lucian's hand shot out, brushing against her shoulder. It was a small touch, almost casual, but it carried the full force of his presence. A weight pressed into her chest, anchoring her in place, and the silver flame in her palms pulsed violently, recognizing him as an ally, yet testing the bond, a spark of rebellion within her that had always feared subjugation. She drew in a shuddering breath. She wanted to resist, to pull away, to run, but she couldn't. Not while he was there, not while his presence radiated control and reassurance all at once. The rival wolves circled, low growls vibrating through the mist, eyes locked on her, muscles coiled like springs ready to snap. Lucian's voice cut through the chaos, sharp, commanding, yet calm. Back. Stay back. His words were a blade, precise, cutting through the tension. And for the first time, she saw it. The ripple in the air, the subtle shift of energy, as if the world recognized him as a force not to be challenged lightly. One of the wolves lunged, and with a movement too swift for her to track, Lucian intercepted it, hands flashing an emotion that was both deadly and fluid, energy radiating from him that seemed to push back the storm itself. Her knees threatened to buckle. Every instinct screamed to flee, but her feet remained planted, mesmerized, terrified, and captivated. The silver flame in her hands surged again, reacting to the presence of his power, an unspoken call and response that she didn't fully understand. Her chest tightened, throat constricting with a mixture of awe, fear, and a strange, dangerous desire. This man, no, this alpha, was not just her protector. He was the living embodiment of control, dominance, and authority, yet he moved with restraint, with consideration, as if he understood the fragility of what he held in his hands. Lucian's eyes met hers across the fog, and in that gaze was an entire story. Battles fought in silence, kingdoms built in shadows, burdens carried alone. There was loneliness there, yes, but also power, the kind that could shield her, could annihilate her enemies, could claim her fire without fear. She felt the pull of it, the magnetic draw of a man who was more than he appeared, a man whose very presence demanded her attention, her trust, even if her body screamed against it. The wolves lunged again, teeth bared, claws slicing the air. Lucien moved like water, effortless, his hands and body a blur. One wolf spun away, growling in frustration. Another collapsed under his swift, precise strike. And all the while, he kept his hand on her shoulder, a tether between them that radiated warmth and command, anchoring her as much as protecting her. She could feel it in the tension of her muscles, the rapid beat of her heart. She was caught between terror and fascination, between the instinct to survive and the dangerous allure of the one who could control the chaos around her. The fog shifted, curling around them, concealing the alley's edges, but she didn't notice. She couldn't. All her senses were trained on him, on the subtle rise and fall of his chest, the way his jaw flexed with tension, the quiet intensity of his gaze that never left hers. Every hair on her body stood on end, not from the cold, but from the sheer force of his presence. She wanted to pull away, to step back, but the pull of him was stronger than the fear that had ruled her for so long. And then, the subtle tease of something darker, something magnificent, something untamed, a hint of a kingdom hidden beneath civility. The way he moved, the ease with which he commanded the space, suggested a life lived in control, a world built on power and respect, where he was not just a man but a king. A king who could crush her enemies with a whisper, who could bend the chaos of the storm to his will, yet chose restraint. She felt her pulse spike again, breath catching in her throat. The silver flame in her hands responded, brighter this time, as though acknowledging a kindred power, a shared destiny that neither of them could yet name. Her mind raced, a storm within the storm.
Who was this man?
How could one person exude such dominance, such lethal calm, and still offer protection without demand? Why did her body respond to his presence, thrumming with a mixture of fear and desire? Each moment stretched, taut as a wire, until the next lunge of danger reminded her that survival, not curiosity, had to come first. The rival wolves hesitated, sensing his authority, sensing that they were no longer the hunters, but merely obstacles in a game far beyond their comprehension. Lucien's hand tightened briefly on her shoulder, a silent promise that she would not be abandoned, and the world seemed to shift subtly around them. The rain's assault, the howl of the wind, even the twisting shadows seemed to bow slightly to the quiet command he radiated. She could feel her pulse aligning with his presence, a rhythm of connection she had long denied herself, a heartbeat that said perhaps she was not as alone as she had thought. And yet, fear lingered. She could not forget the danger, the shadows waiting for her misstep, the storm threatening to drag her under. Her silver flame pulsed wildly, responding to the tension and uncertainty, a reminder that she was both weapon and target, vulnerable yet untouchable. Lucien sensed it, of course, he always sensed it, and with a subtle, almost imperceptible motion, he guided her behind him, shielding her, anchoring her, claiming the space between them with a silent, unyielding authority. Every instinct told her to be wary, to flee, to trust no one, yet every nerve, every flicker of power, every shiver of recognition, whispered that she had no choice. Survival demanded trust, and trust demanded surrender, and the question of whether she would yield to him, or to the danger, loomed like the storm above them. Do you dare ignore the one who could protect you from the fire to come? Subscribe or risk standing helpless when the next danger strikes. And comment the country you're watching from. Let me see where your courage lies. Her knees threatened to give way as adrenaline coursed through her veins, yet she stood, anchored by the weight of his presence and the silent promise that he would not fail. Each beat of the storm, each gust of icy wind, each shadow that moved too close reminded her of the peril, yet also of the possibility. Possibility that she was not entirely alone, that she might survive. That perhaps, just perhaps, there was someone who could meet her fire with equal measure. And in that instant, in the storm-drenched alley with the fog curling around their feet, she realized something she had never allowed herself to admit. She wanted to see where this would lead. She wanted to test the boundaries of fear and desire. She wanted to understand the man who had appeared from the shadows and turned her world upside down in a single heartbeat. The alley breathed around them like a living creature, fog curling along the stones, the rain streaking everything in silver and shadow. Seraphine's pulse hammered in her ears, each beat echoing the fear that had become her constant companion, and yet, beneath it, a flicker of something else, hope, perhaps, or the dangerous allure of trust, pulled her forward. Lucien's hand on her shoulder was light, almost imperceptible, but it carried authority. It anchored her trembling body and demanded attention, even as her instincts screamed to flee. The rival wolves had begun to circle again, eyes glowing like embers in the fog. Their snarls were low and vicious, a growling chorus that vibrated through her chest. She could feel the silver flame in her palms flicker, responding to both her fear and the scent of danger. She had never needed her power more, and yet it trembled beyond her control, a wild creature echoing the chaos that surrounded them. Lucien's presence, however, was steady. He moved between her and the wolves, body tense, alert, yet composed in a way that made her feel simultaneously safe and exposed. Every motion was deliberate, every glance calculated, as if he could anticipate danger before it manifested. The subtle flex of his fingers, the shift of his weight, the silent command of his posture, it was all alpha dominance veiled in civility, and it sent a shiver through H. But from the intensity of his gaze, the unspoken promise that he would not abandon her. Her breaths came fast and shallow, mingling with the hiss of rain against stone, each inhale tasting like metal and wet earth, the sharp tang of adrenaline flooding her senses. She wanted to step back, to put distance between them, but every fiber of her body resisted, drawn to the danger he both represented and controlled. The wolves lunged again, and Lucien was a blur of motion. Rain-soaked hair clung to his sharp jawline, clothes plastered to his form, but it did nothing to diminish the aura of authority that radiated from him. He intercepted them with calculated precision, twisting and striking in a rhythm that seemed almost too perfect, a dance of predator against predator. Seraphine could only watch, frozen, the silver flame in her palms pulsing with each strike, reacting to the danger and to the presence of the man who had appeared from the shadows to claim her attention. She swallowed hard, the taste of fear and rain and anticipation coating her tongue. Every instinct screamed to run, yet her body remained rooted, tethered by the light pressure of his hand, the magnetic pull of his dominance. She realized, with a jolt that made her chest tighten, that she was not only terrified but fascinated. Every strike, every glance, every subtle shift of his weight was a lesson in control and power. And the fact that he had chosen to intervene, to protect her in a storm that offered no guarantees, stirred something inside her, a dangerous, forbidden curiosity. One wolf hesitated, sensing the authority he radiated, and Lucien's eyes met hers. That single glance was enough to send warmth flooding through her, to make her knees weak despite the cold. There was a question in his gaze, silent yet clear. Trust me, and you might survive this. Do not, and you may perish. The silver flame pulsed again, brighter this time, as though her power recognized him as a kindred force, a protector, perhaps even a destiny she had not yet dared to imagine. A flash of movement to her left, a shadow lunging closer than before, made her flinch. Lucien reacted instantly, his hands a blur, intercepting the attack with effortless precision. The wolf yelped and skidded backward, eyes wide with surprise and fear. He glanced at her quickly, his gaze holding hers, steady and unwavering. That brief connection, fleeting yet profound, made the silver flame surge violently, a wild pulse that mirrored her rising heartbeat. She realized then that fear was no longer the only emotion coursing through her. Fascination mingled with terror, desire mingled with uncertainty. She had spent years running from danger, from power, from trust. And now, standing in the storm with this man, this alpha who moved through peril as if it were a child's plaything, she felt an undeniable pull toward something she had long denied herself. Lucien shifted slightly, a subtle adjustment that drew her closer, just enough to shelter her from the wind and the predatory circling of the wolves. His voice was low, a husky undertone cutting through the storm. "You're stronger than you realize, but strength alone won't save you tonight." The words, simple yet weighty, resonated within her. She wanted to argue, to insist that she could handle herself, but she couldn't. Not with the danger pressing in from every side, not with the fire in her hands reacting to both her fear and the gravity of his presence. Her voice caught in her throat, and she was acutely aware of how exposed she was, not just to the wolves, but to him, to his observation, to the undeniable pull that stretched taut between them. The wolves lunged again, more coordinated this time, and the alley became a blur of rain, shadows, and motion. Lucien moved with a fluid grace, intercepting, striking, commanding, each motion a calculated symphony of power. And through it all, his hand remained on her shoulder, steady, anchoring, a reminder that she did not face this alone. She could feel the heat of him, the energy that radiated control and dominance, and it was intoxicating, terrifying, exhilarating all at once. Her silver flame pulsed violently in response, as though acknowledging him, responding to his presence. It flared, brighter than before, the raw energy of it licking at her fingers, demanding attention, demanding mastery. She knew instinctively that he could feel it, that he could sense the untamed fire within her, and for the first time, she did not shrink from it. She wanted him to see it, to recognize it, perhaps even to guide it. The storm raged around them, wind lashing, rain blinding, but in the center of the chaos, there was a strange calm. Lucien's focus was absolute, a perfect balance of predator and protector, and the wolves faltered in the face of his authority. One by one, they retreated, eyes wary, growls fading, until only the echoes of their threat remained. Seraphine's knees trembled, and she sank slightly against the brick wall for support. Lucien's hand didn't leave her shoulder. Instead, it pressed just a little firmer, a silent reassurance that she was safe, at least for now. Her chest heaved with shallow breaths, body trembling from the adrenaline and fear, but also from something deeper, something stirring beneath the terror. She realized, with a jolt, that she had never felt this combination of safety and danger, attraction and apprehension, in her life. He leaned slightly closer, just enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, the subtle pulse of power beneath his calm exterior. "You're not alone," he murmured, voice husky, filled with a gravity that made her heart stutter. "And if you stay near me, you won't have to be." Her pulse spiked. The silver flame surged in response, reacting not to threat, but to him, to the intensity of the moment, to the unspoken promise that lingered in the space between them. She swallowed hard, throat tight, mind racing with conflicting thoughts, fear, desire, curiosity, hope, and the dangerous thrill of surrendering, just a little, to the pull he exerted. Do you dare ignore the one who could protect you from the fire to come? Subscribe or risk standing helpless when the next danger strikes. And don't forget to comment the country you're watching from. Let me see who is brave enough to face the storm with us. The alley seemed to close around them, fog curling, rain blurring the edges of vision, and yet the world narrowed to the two of them. Every heartbeat, every flicker of silver flame, every breath of wind seemed to pulse in unison with the rhythm of his presence. She felt the weight of trust pressing on her chest, an invisible tether that bound her to him, a force she could neither resist nor fully understand. Lucien's gaze swept the alley one last time, ensuring that the immediate threat had passed, before returning to her. There was an intensity there, a careful measurement of her worth, her strength, her potential. He didn't just see her fear. He saw her fire, her power, the untamed energy that she had hidden even from herself. And he acknowledged it, not with words, but with a presence that demanded recognition, that compelled her to accept it, to honor it, to awaken it. She inhaled sharply, chest rising and falling rapidly, rain mixing with the sweat of exertion and fear. The silver flame danced in her palms, a reminder that survival alone was not enough, that control, trust, and connection were equally vital. And in that moment, she realized the truth she had long avoided. Lucian Ashcroft was more than a protector. He was a challenge, a guide, a storm of dominance and desire that she could neither flee from nor ignore. The storm had passed, leaving the alley damp and quiet, but the echoes of fear still clung to Seraphine Vale like shadows that refused to retreat. Every droplet that slid down her coat, every chill of rain-soaked air brushing her skin, reminded her that danger could return in an instant. Yet, in the hollowed silence that followed, her mind wandered to a different kind of storm, one that had begun long before tonight, one she had carried inside her since childhood. Her thoughts drifted first to the Moonshadow Pack, a name that had once been synonymous with family, security, and belonging. But the memory was jagged, painful, filled with echoes of judgmental eyes and whispered accusations. She had been different from the start, a girl marked by fire, a bloodline cursed with a silver flame that could neither be tamed nor concealed. Her earliest attempts to control it had ended in disaster, small sparks flaring into blinding bursts, leaving scorched earth and terrified witnesses in their wake. Every failure had been a verdict on her worth, every misstep a reminder that she was dangerous, unwanted, unlovable. She remembered the day her exile was announced. The chill of the council chamber, the faces of elders etched in disappointment, the murmurs that followed her down every corridor. She had tried to explain, to plead, to show that she could control her power, that she could be trusted. But no one had listened. Their fear had drowned out every word, every promise, every shred of potential that she had clutched like a lifeline. The decision was final. The child of the silver flame would leave the pack, alone, unprotected, a danger to herself and others. That memory came with the sting of fresh wounds, as though time had done nothing to dull the shame. She had wandered through forests that whispered at night, through frozen plains and storm-torn valleys, the silver flame her only companion and her only curse. There had been nights when she curled in the hollow of an ancient tree, hands glowing with untrained power, tears freezing on her cheeks, asking the universe why she had been given a gift that everyone feared. The loneliness had been crushing. Every howl from distant wolves reminded her that she was exiled, every echo in the wind a judgment, unworthy, uncontrolled, untethered. And yet, despite the pain, she survived. She had learned to run, to hide, to mask the fire within her. She had walked through cities and shadows, through storms and strangers, always careful to conceal the power that marked her as different. But hiding had its own cost. She had never known true safety, never experienced the warmth of trust that came without suspicion. Every connection had ended before it began, because even the curious or the kind eventually recoiled from the danger they sensed in her. Lucian Ashcroft's presence now stirred all of that, igniting memories that she had tried to bury. He had appeared as if from nowhere, a figure carved from the storm, radiating authority, command, and danger. And yet, beneath it, there was an unmistakable offer of protection, a subtle acknowledgement that she was not entirely alone, not if she allowed herself to believe. She did not trust him, could not yet, but every small gesture, every deliberate motion, every protective glance chipped at the walls she had built over years of exile and shame. She recalled her earliest days of failing to control her silver flame. A classroom of young wolves, all of them shifting effortlessly into sleek forms, their powers guided by training, by discipline, by community. And then there was her, sparks leaping from her hands uncontrollably, silver light blazing across the floor as she panicked. Teachers had screamed, her peers had recoiled, and she had fled, red-faced, humiliated, clutching the strange warmth of power she could neither master nor abandon. That shame had followed her like a second skin, invisible yet heavy, a constant reminder of her difference. Yet Lucien didn't recoil. He didn't flinch or avert his eyes when he saw her silver flame pulse in response to danger. He only adjusted his stance, eyes narrowed, muscles taut, and offered her a silent acknowledgement that said, "I see you. All of you." And for the first time in years, she felt the fragile stirrings of something she had nearly forgotten: hope. The memory of her mother's warnings came unbidden, echoing like a ghost in her mind. Your bloodline is both a gift and a curse. Never let anyone control it. Never let anyone define you, but beware the ones who would seek to use it. Those words had guided her, haunted her, restrained her, and yet tonight, standing in the alley with Lucien Ashcroft holding the space between her and the storm, she realized their true meaning. Her power was dangerous, yes, but it was also hers, unclaimed by fear or exile. And perhaps, finally, someone existed who could not only witness it, but respect it, guide it, even protect it. Lucien's hand still rested lightly on her shoulder, a tether that anchored her to the present while allowing her mind to drift through the labyrinth of her past. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone was a reassurance she hadn't known she craved. And yet, the question remained, could she trust him? Could she surrender even a fragment of the walls she had spent years constructing? Fear whispered that she should not. The ghosts of rejection, of exile, of failed control, clamored for caution. But another voice, quieter yet more insistent, whispered possibility. The alley was silent now, save for the soft drip of water from rooftops, the distant rumble of thunder, the occasional hiss of wind curling through corners. Her mind traced the years of solitude, each memory sharp and jagged, yet part of a path that had led her to this moment. She had been abandoned, yes. Feared, yes. Misunderstood, yes. But she had endured. And endurance, she realized, was a form of strength that no exile could take from her. Lucien shifted slightly, a subtle movement, almost imperceptible, yet enough to draw her attention back to him. His gaze softened, the hard edges of dominance giving way to a gentler, unspoken concern. "You've carried this weight alone for too long," he said, voice husky yet deliberate. "You don't have to anymore." Her throat tightened, chest constricting with emotions she could not name. Relief, fear, longing, hope, each collided violently within her, making it impossible to distinguish one from the other. She wanted to ask him why he cared, why he had come, why he had intervened when no one else ever had. But she could not. Words failed her, choked by years of mistrust and the raw intensity of the moment. Instead, she allowed herself a quiet observation, the first in years that was not tinged with fear or shame. She noticed the subtle strength in his posture, the precise calm of his movements, the way he assessed danger and acted with confidence, not arrogance. He was not a savior in the traditional sense, not a flawless hero, but he was a force to be reckoned with, and he had chosen to stand with her. Her silver flame pulsed faintly, a soft glow in the quiet alley, responding not to immediate threat, but to the presence of someone who might finally understand it, someone who might finally recognize it as part of her rather than as a curse. A memory of her mother's whispered words, long forgotten, surfaced once more. One day, the right eyes will see you for what you are. Not just your fire, but the strength it represents. Could Lucien Ashcroft be those eyes? The thought both exhilarated and terrified her. She did not trust easily, had not trusted in years, and yet, a part of her, a cautious, desperate part, wanted to reach out, to test the connection, to see if the warmth he offered was genuine or just another illusion waiting to shatter her. If you feel the pain of being alone in a world that fears you, subscribe to Florence Werewolf Romance Collection now, or leave a comment below telling the country you're watching from and why you refuse to join us. The alleys seemed to shrink around them, fog curling like fingers that sought to pull her back into the shadows of memory and fear. Yet Lucien's presence was a constant anchor, a reminder that survival, trust, and perhaps even connection were still possible. Each heartbeat aligned with his, the rhythm of shared danger, shared experience, shared existence. And though she did not yet admit it aloud, she knew something undeniable. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm within her. But for the first time, she no longer had to face it alone. The memory of her earliest betrayal clawed at Seraphine's mind, vivid and relentless. She had been barely 10 winters old when the elders of the Moonshadow Pack had first noticed the silver glow in her hands. They had gathered in the ancient hall of stone, faces etched with worry and fear, and whispered words that seemed to seep into her bones. She is unstable, dangerous, a threat to all of us. She remembered that day with perfect clarity. She had been trying, desperately, to create a small flame, something simple to prove she could control it. Her hands had trembled, sweat slicking her palms, and the small ember had leapt into brilliance far beyond her intent. The hall had erupted into chaos, wolves recoiling, elders shouting, friends staring in fear. Humiliation had washed over her in burning waves, and in that instant, she had learned the first lesson of her life: to hide, to bury the fire that marked her, even when it screamed for release. Years of careful concealment followed. She became a shadow among her pack, moving silently, speaking little, controlling every flicker of her power with obsessive caution. Still, whispers clung to her like a second skin. Too dangerous, too proud, the curse of the silver flame. Every glance carried judgment, every passing wolf a silent accusation. Even her parents, though they tried to shield her, could not erase the fear that lingered in their eyes. Exile came not as a surprise, but as a knife twisted into her chest. She remembered the day she was banished, the icy wind cutting across her cheeks as she stepped out of the council chambers, the pack's eyes boring into her back like claws. The elder's words echoed in her mind, sharp as shattered glass. You are a danger we cannot contain. You are alone now. Alone. The word had clung to her, heavier than any chain, sinking into her soul and refusing release. She had wandered through the wilds for months, the silver flame her only companion, a reminder of both her curse and her strength. Nights were the hardest. She would curl beneath the skeletal branches of frost-covered trees, rain dripping in rivulets that chilled her to the bone, and stare at her hands as they pulsed faintly with power she could never fully tame. In the quiet of the night, her thoughts would turn bitter, angry, longing. She longed for someone to understand, to see beyond the flame to the girl who trembled beneath it. But no one came. No one ever had. Lucien's presence in the storm-drenched alley brought all of that flooding back. The fear, the loneliness, the desperate craving for safety. He had appeared without warning, yet somehow, without question, he had become a tether, a presence that made the cold and isolation recede, even if only slightly. She didn't trust him, not fully, but there was a kernel of something she had not felt in years. Hope. The hope that perhaps someone could understand her, that perhaps she was not destined to carry her burden alone. The silver flame in her palms pulsed violently as memories of her failures came to the forefront. She remembered the time she had tried to save a young pup from a collapsing tree. Her powers had erupted unpredictably, flaring like wild lightning, and instead of saving him, she had left scars across the ground, and the pack had been glimpses of what she could become. Lucien's eyes found hers again, and she flinched, the familiar tension of uncertainty coiling in her chest. His gaze was piercing, assessing, understanding, and terrifying all at once. It was the kind of gaze that could strip pretense away, that could force the truth from even the most guarded heart. And in his eyes, she saw no fear of her silver flame, no recoil at her dangerous potential. Only recognition. Only an acknowledgement that she was more than the exile, more than mistakes, more than the curse whispered in hushed tones behind closed doors. The storm outside had faded into a gentle drizzle, mist curling along the alley like the lingering ghost of danger. Yet the storm within her raged still. Every memory of rejection, of shame, of exile pressed against her heart, threatening to consume the fragile hope that Lucien's presence had ignited. She wanted to retreat, to hide behind the walls she had built over years of isolation. But every time she looked at him, at the calm authority radiating from him, a whisper inside her demanded she stay. That whisper said, "You are not alone." That whisper said, "There is someone who sees you." She thought of the small gestures that had begun to pierce her defenses, the way he had guided her behind him during the wolf attack, the subtle shift of his body to shield her, the light pressure of his hand on her shoulder. Each action was deliberate, measured, and protective, yet it carried something more, a promise. A promise that she might, finally, find someone willing to meet her fire without fear, someone who might accept her not despite her power, but because of it. Her thoughts drifted again to the Moonshadow Pack, to the cold stone halls where whispers had followed her like vultures. She remembered the council's faces, eyes narrowed in judgment, and the sting of her parents' conflicted expressions. They had loved her, in their way, but fear had always edged their care. She had been a girl set apart, feared, and ultimately rejected, and the scars ran deeper than any physical wound could. Yet here, in the alley with Lucien, she felt a tentative shift. Perhaps exile had not been the end, but the beginning. Perhaps the years of solitude had forged something in her, a resilience, a raw strength that could finally be recognized and nurtured. She did not fully understand how or why, but the thought ignited a small spark of hope. Lucien's voice, low and deliberate, cut through the quiet drizzle. "You carry a burden far heavier than most could endure, Seraphine. But you do not have to bear it alone." Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to insist she could manage, to claim independence even if it cost her comfort. But the words caught in her throat, choked by years of mistrust and the raw intensity of being seen. And in that silent acknowledgement, a bridge began to form, fragile yet undeniable, between the exile and the alpha who had appeared from the storm. The alleys seemed to shrink around them, fog curling like fingers that sought to pull her back into memory and fear. Yet Lucien's presence remained an anchor, unyielding, a steady force in the midst of the swirling past and present. Every heartbeat aligned with his, a rhythm of survival, of shared experience, of connection that she had thought impossible. Her silver flame flickered once more, responding not to immediate danger, but to the recognition, to the understanding, to the subtle, unspoken promise that she was not entirely alone. The fire within her pulsed, not with panic, but with the cautious thrill of possibility. She allowed herself, for the briefest of moments, to imagine trust, to imagine connection, to imagine a life where her power was not feared but accepted. If you feel the pain of being alone in a world that fears you, subscribe to Florence Werewolf Romance Collection now, or leave a comment below telling the country you're watching from and why you refuse to join us. The memory of her exile, of her failed control, of every whispered accusation and glance of fear, remained, but it no longer held the same suffocating power. Lucien's presence, steady and commanding, had created a space where survival and trust could coexist, where fire could meet guidance, where fear could mingle with hope. She exhaled slowly, a shiver running through her body, and for the first time in years, allowed herself to feel something beyond fear, the possibility of belonging, even if only fleeting, even if only tentative, in the shadow of the alpha who had claimed her attention, her protection, and perhaps, in time, a place in her heart. The night air carried an electric charge as Seraphine Vale and Lucien Ashcroft stepped into the shadowed expanse of Eclipse Grove. The trees towered above them like ancient sentinels, their branches intertwined to form a vaulted canopy that filtered the blood-red moonlight into fractured beams that danced upon the forest floor. Each step Seraphine took seemed to resonate with the pulse of the earth itself, a rhythm that was both foreign and intimately familiar, as though the soil beneath her feet remembered her before even she did. Lucien moved beside her with quiet authority, a constant presence, his eyes reflecting the faint glow of the moon as though he had absorbed its light into his very being. He did not speak, yet his silence was a language in itself, one that suggested he understood far more than she could ever articulate. Seraphine's heart hammered against her ribcage, a staccato that mingled fear and awe, and she felt the familiar flicker of silver flame pulse in her veins, a subtle reminder of the power she both dreaded and longed to embrace. The grove was alive in ways she could not yet comprehend. Ancient runes, carved into the gnarled bark of massive oaks and inscribed upon stone slabs half buried in moss, began to shimmer as she approached. The glow was faint at first, like embers struggling against the darkness, then grew steadily, responding to her presence. A low hum vibrated through the air, resonating in her chest, tugging at her consciousness, whispering truths she could not yet name. Images flickered at the edges of her vision, visions of fire and shadow, of wolves moving with purpose across scarlet fields, of a child wreathed in silver light, standing alone yet unbroken. Seraphine's breath hitched. The visions were tantalizing, overwhelming, and frightening all at once. She staggered slightly, reaching for Lucien, who caught her wrist with a grip that was firm yet gentle. "Steady," he murmured, his voice low, resonant, the cadence of command softened by concern. "It's only the beginning." She could feel it. The weight of a destiny far larger than herself pressing against her soul. The title, Child of the Flame, echoed through her mind like a refrain, an incantation she both feared and ached to understand. Her fingers trembled as they hovered over one of the glowing runes, the warmth radiating through her skin, a tangible connection to the prophecy whispered through centuries of wolfkind. And yet, doubts surged within her, an insistent tide that whispered she was unworthy, incapable, too fractured by years of exile and fear to embrace what she was meant to become. Lucien's gaze did not waver, unwavering as the roots of the ancient trees around them. He observed her with a mixture of reverence and scrutiny, his presence a tether between her trembling heart and the truths she could not yet face. "You are more than your past," he said, words deliberate, unyielding. "Do not let fear blind you to what you are, what you were always meant to be." Her chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to insist that she was ordinary, that she was flawed, that she could never fulfill the echoes of this prophecy. But even as the words formed in her mind, the grove seemed to respond. The runes pulsed brighter, as though acknowledging her hesitation, acknowledging the spark within her that refused to be ignored. The hum in the air grew, a chorus of ancient voices, whispering secrets older than memory, urging her forward even as her heart screamed retreat. She took a tentative step closer to the central altar, a stone slab etched with carvings that seemed to twist and shift under the moonlight. The silver flame in her palms flared involuntarily, illuminating the intricate patterns with a brilliance that made the air shimmer. Lucien moved closer, his hand brushing hers in a gesture that was both grounding and electrifying. "Feel it," he said softly. "Let it speak to you. Don't fight it." The words were both balm and challenge. Seraphine closed her eyes, allowing herself to sink into the sensation, the raw connection to something vast, something eternal, something that recognized her, called to her, demanded she rise above fear. Visions intensified, a battlefield of light and shadow, wolves with eyes like molten gold, a figure in silver fire standing defiantly against darkness, commanding elements she had only glimpsed in fleeting sparks. The image was her, yet not entirely her, a projection of potential she could scarcely comprehend, yet that thrummed with undeniable truth. Doubt fought back, relentless and insidious. Who am I to claim this? The question gnawed at her, a parasite of uncertainty rooted in years of rejection. Her exile, her failures, the lives she had left behind. All of it screamed she was unfit. Yet Lucien's presence was a steady anchor. He did not demand her belief, did not scold her hesitation. He simply watched, silently affirming her worth, offering a quiet challenge to rise above the shadows that had clung to her for so long. The wind shifted, rustling through the leaves like a living breath, carrying with it whispers she could almost understand. Names, fragments of sentences, visions of trials yet to come. Seraphine's pulse quickened, each thrum of her heart echoing the ancient rhythms of the grove itself. She realized the silver flame was not just a power, it was a voice, a language, a bridge between her fear and the destiny that awaited her. Lucien stepped closer, so close that the heat from his presence mingled with hers, unspoken yet undeniable. The prophecy, he murmured, was never about control. It's about courage, about facing what others cannot, about rising even when the world fears you. She swallowed hard. Courage. Rising. The words felt like a weight and a liberation all at once. Her hands trembled, fingers brushing the runes again, each touch sending shivers of recognition through her entire body. She could see it now, the threads of fate weaving around her, pulling her toward trials and victories, losses and triumphs she had never imagined. And at the center of it all, a choice: to remain bound by fear and doubt, or to step forward, claim the fire that was hers, embrace the destiny whispered through centuries. The grove seemed to respond to her inner turmoil. Shadows twisted and writhed in the moonlight, as though alive, as though testing her resolve. Leaves shimmered with an otherworldly silver glow, reflecting the pulse of her power. A distant howl echoed, carrying with it a resonance she felt in her bones, a reminder that she was never entirely alone, even in the vastness of the prophecy that loomed above her. Lucien's hand found hers, firm and reassuring, a tether that anchored her to the present while the visions threatened to overwhelm. "Do not run from this," he said, voice low and commanding, yet tinged with awe. "You are the flame they speak of, and I will not let you face it alone." Her breath caught. His words were not empty promises. They were a declaration, a covenant, a recognition of something within her that even she had not fully embraced. The silver flame flared again, responding not to fear, but to the affirmation, the connection, the subtle thrill of being seen, understood, and accepted. And yet, doubt lingered, stubborn and unyielding. What if I fail? What if I bring ruin instead of salvation? The visions, intense and beautiful, also carried warnings: destruction, shadows, betrayal, trials that would test every fiber of her being. She wanted to turn away, to retreat into the comfort of anonymity, the safety of obscurity. But the pulse in her chest, the tether of Lucien's hand, the hum of ancient power beneath her feet, demanded she step forward, demanded she claim what was hers. Some secrets are too powerful to ignore. Subscribe now, or be the one left trembling while the prophecy unfolds. The blood moon above intensified, casting a crimson glow across the grove, bathing the runes, the trees, and their intertwined shadows in surreal light. Every heartbeat, every pulse of silver flame, every breath she drew, aligned with the rhythm of the forest, the ancient magic that had waited centuries for the one marked by fire to arrive. Seraphine understood, in that visceral, breathtaking moment, that destiny was not a gift. It was a responsibility, a trial, a call to rise above fear, above doubt, above the weight of all she had endured. Lucien's gaze held her steady, unwavering, filled with silent command and unspoken promise. "You are ready," he said simply. "Not because you have all the answers, but because you have the courage to seek them." She exhaled slowly, the silver flame pulsing in tandem with her heartbeat, a living testament to the fire within. Around them, Eclipse Grove seemed to shift, the air vibrating with anticipation, with the promise of trials, victories, and the unbreakable bond forming between Exile and Alpha. She was not yet whole, not yet in command, but for the first time, she felt the glimmer of possibility, that the prophecy spoke not of fear, but of awakening. And in that awakening, she realized something extraordinary. She did not have to face it alone. Lucien Ashcroft was there, steady, commanding, patient, and protective. The bond forming between them was fragile yet undeniable, a tether stronger than fear, more enduring than doubt, capable of guiding her through the crucible that awaited. The moonlight bathed them in surreal, crimson brilliance, the grove whispering secrets older than memory. Seraphine's silver flame burned brighter, no longer merely a spark of panic or fear, but a pulse of identity, of power, of destiny beginning to stir. She lifted her eyes to the ancient runes, to the blood moon, and allowed herself, for the first time in her life, to feel the pull of what she was meant to become. The air in Eclipse Grove seemed alive, charged with a magic older than memory itself. Each footstep Seraphine Vale took pressed against the soft moss of the forest floor, a living carpet that whispered beneath her weight. The blood-red moon hung low in the sky, spilling crimson across the ancient trunks and tangled roots, casting twisted shadows that reached for her like unseen fingers. She shivered, part from the chill of the night, part from anticipation, part from the eerie weight of destiny pressing against her chest. Lucian Ashcroft moved beside her with the silent grace of a predator, every step measured, every glance deliberate. He did not speak, but the tension in his presence was undeniable. An unspoken reassurance that he was not just here for protection, but because he understood something about her that she herself barely grasped. The air between them was taut, vibrating with the pull of shared secrets, unspoken emotions, and the faintest brush of attraction that neither dared name yet. Seraphine's hands trembled, her silver flame flickering faintly in her palms, responding to the overwhelming energy of the grove. She had felt power before, yes, but never like this. The runes carved into the trees and scattered stones seemed to pulse in harmony with her heartbeat, ancient symbols reacting to her presence, as if recognizing her as something long awaited. Every flicker of light, every whisper of wind, seemed to speak directly to her, teasing the edges of comprehension, urging her forward, daring her to claim what she had always been. Images flashed at the edge of her vision, a figure wreathed in silver fire, standing alone against a tide of darkness. A forest aflame, wolves with eyes like molten gold circling, loyal and unyielding, shadows twisting and writhing with intelligence, seeking to test her strength and determination. Her chest tightened, the pulse in her veins quickening as fear wrestled with awe, hesitation with an undeniable yearning to step into the role the prophecy demanded. Lucian's gaze found hers, and the intensity of it made her knees weak. It was more than observation. It was recognition, an acknowledgement of every scar, every failure, every fear she had carried in silence. "You are the flame," he said softly, voice low but resonant, carrying over the hushed whispers of the grove. "Not just for what you can do, but for who you are. Do not let fear blind you to your purpose." She swallowed hard, the words stirring a mix of doubt and hope. Purpose. Destiny. The weight of centuries seemed to settle onto her shoulders in a moment, crushing yet exhilarating, terrifying yet magnetic. Her pulse quickened as she stepped closer to a stone altar etched with swirling runes, feeling the hum of power thrumming beneath her feet. Each step was measured, deliberate, as though the forest itself tested her resolve, gauging whether she was ready to embrace the path laid before her. Visions intensified. She saw herself standing at the edge of a cliff as firestorms raged around her, wolves and humans alike frozen in fear at the brilliance of her silver flame. She saw Lucian beside her, unwavering, a steadfast anchor in the chaos, guiding, shielding, silently promising that she was not alone. The pulse of magic in her veins answered to the visions, flickering and surging in time with her heartbeat, a living testament to the bond forming between exile and alpha. Doubt surged, gnawing at the edges of her consciousness. "I am not worthy. I cannot. I will fail." The whisper of fear was persistent, a parasite of uncertainty she had carried all her life. The moon shadow packs rejection, the years of exile, the shame of uncontrolled power, all of it threatened to undo the fragile courage budding in her chest. Yet the grove seemed to breathe with her, the runes glowing brighter, as though encouraging her to persist, urging her to step into the destiny that had called her long before she was born. Lucian stepped closer, so near that the warmth of his presence pressed against her skin. "Courage is not the absence of fear," he murmured, voice heavy with gravitas, "but the strength to act in spite of it. You are not alone, Seraphine. Not now. Not ever again." The words resonated, each syllable a spark against the tinder of her heart. The silver flame pulsed more brightly, responding to conviction rather than panic, illuminating the intricate carvings on the altar and the surrounding stones. She could feel the hum of ancient energy intertwining with her own, a dance of power and destiny that threatened to overwhelm yet promised awakening. Visions sharpened into clarity, rival alphas cloaked in shadows, plotting to seize the grove and extinguish the prophecy. Shadow beasts, twisted and relentless, circling with intent to destroy, a council of elders murmuring in fear and awe, their eyes flicking to her with recognition and dread. She saw herself standing at the heart of it all, silver flame coiling around her like a living aura, wolves at her side, Lucien's hand steadying her through trials she had never imagined. Her chest tightened again. Her soul, demanding she move forward, claiming the power she had hidden for too long. Lucien's hand brushed hers again, and the simple contact sent a jolt through her, grounding her even as the visions threatened to pull her into chaos. His eyes met hers, unwavering, full of unspoken promise and command. "Do not run," he said simply. "The prophecy chose you, not by chance, but because you have the strength to endure what others cannot." She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, not from sadness, but from the raw intensity of being seen, recognized, and challenged to rise beyond fear. The forest around them pulsed with life, the runes shimmering in synchrony with her heartbeat, the wind carrying whispers of ancestors, wolves long past, and the weight of a legacy that demanded recognition. Her silver flame surged, no longer merely a spark of panic, but a radiant beacon of identity, potential, and destiny. She could feel every pulse of the grove, every heartbeat of the forest, every unspoken expectation converging upon her. And yet, even in the midst of awe and fear, a thrill of something more intimate stirred, her connection to Lucien, the tether of trust, protection, and an unspoken bond that neither dared name but both felt. Some secrets are too powerful to ignore. Subscribe now, or be the one left trembling while the prophecy unfolds. The visions shifted again. She saw herself confronting shadow beasts, silver flame roaring around her, wolves rallying at her command, rival alphas pausing, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. She saw herself faltering, yet rising, unbroken, unstoppable. She saw Lucien's hand on her shoulder, steadying her, guiding her, anchoring her through each trial. Her heart pounded with anticipation, every nerve alight with the thrill of potential and the terror of responsibility. She understood, in a visceral, bone-deep way, that the prophecy was not a passive tale to observe. It was a challenge, a crucible, a test that demanded action, courage, and unyielding will. And she, Seraphine Vale, the exile, the girl who had once trembled beneath the weight of fear and rejection, was standing at its center. The blood moon's light intensified, the grove humming with recognition, the runes blazing as though to crown her awakening. Every shadow, every whisper, every flicker of silver flame answered to her presence, as if the forest itself acknowledged that the child of the flame had arrived. And with Lucien beside her, unwavering, protective, commanding yet silent, she felt the stirrings of something extraordinary, not just power, not just destiny, but connection, trust, and the possibility of love forged in the fire of trials yet to come. Her breath hitched as a new vision flickered, a council of wolf elders, faces lined with age and fear, murmuring, "She is the one. The child of the flame, but will she rise or fall?" The uncertainty mirrored her own, the tension between potential and doubt, yet in that moment, the silver flame pulsed brighter than ever, answering the question with unspoken certainty. She would rise. Lucien's hand tightened subtly around hers, a silent pledge, a grounding force amid the chaos of visions and prophecy. "You are ready," he said, voice low and filled with awe. "Not because you have all the answers, but because you have the courage to seek them. That is what makes you the flame." Seraphine exhaled, the silver light of her flames stretching outward, illuminating the grove, bathing the ancient runes in radiant brilliance. She felt the weight of centuries, the pull of destiny, the whisper of ancestors, and the tether of trust to Lucien, all converging into a single, breathtaking moment of awakening. For the first time, she did not tremble at her potential. She did not flinch from the fire within her. She embraced it, cautiously, tentatively, yet with a certainty that thrilled and terrified in equal measure. The grove shivered with recognition. Shadows shifted, whispers of ancient wolves carried through the trees, and the pulse of the forest aligned with her heartbeat, echoing the rhythm of something eternal, something unbroken, something waiting for her to claim it. Lucien's gaze held hers, unwavering, filled with a promise that went beyond words, a promise of protection, guidance, and a bond that would endure trials, danger, and the relentless march of destiny. And in that gaze, Seraphine understood something fundamental. She did not face the prophecy alone.
Not now.
Not ever again. The air in Eclipse Grove shifted abruptly, the harmony of silver flame and ancient runes snapping under the weight of approaching danger. Seraphine Vale felt it first. Not with her eyes, but with her instincts, a visceral tremor rippling through her chest, through her veins, a premonition that something dark and relentless was closing in. The wind changed direction, carrying with it the faint scent of rival packs, of wolves who would see her burn before they ever understood her worth. Her pulse spiked, a drumbeat of terror and adrenaline, her silver flame flaring faintly in her palms, responding to the tension that hung like a living shroud over the grove. Lucien Ashcroft moved like shadowed steel beside her, every motion deliberate, his senses extended, scanning the forest for threats, reading the subtle shifts in the underbrush and shadows. "They're here," he murmured, voice low, resonant, carrying authority that demanded she focus even as fear clawed at her mind. "And they're testing you." Before she could respond, the grove erupted into chaos. Figures emerged from the trees, moving with predatory precision, the alpha rivals of surrounding packs, their eyes glinting with malice and hunger. Shadow beasts, creatures twisted by dark magic and loyalty to power-hungry alphas, leaped from the underbrush, snarling and snapping, their forms flickering like smoke in the crimson moonlight. The ground seemed to quake beneath the weight of their advance, the grove itself shivering in recognition of the confrontation about to unfold. Seraphine's breath hitched, fear and exhilaration tangling in her chest. This was not a test she could flee, not a shadow she could evade. The silver flame in her hands surged, an instinctual response to the threat, and she felt it curl and stretch as though alive, as though aware of her terror and her will. She had never wielded it so deliberately before, had never allowed the fire within to manifest fully, but now, under the gaze of predators and prophecy alike, she had no choice. Lucien's hand brushed hers, grounding her, tethering her amidst the storm of approaching enemies. His eyes, unwavering and filled with a mixture of pride and caution, met hers. "Do not hold back," he said, voice low but firm. "They will learn what it means to face the child of the flame." The silver light burst from her palms, coiling outward like serpents of fire, striking the first wave of shadow beasts. They screamed, a sound that was both unnatural and piercing, dissolving into smoke under the brilliance of her power. Wolves from rival packs faltered at the sight, hesitation flickering in their eyes as they confronted the raw, unbridled force Seraphine had barely begun to command. Her pulse raced, adrenaline sharpening every sense, every nerve alive to the danger, every breath drawn with intensity that left her dizzy yet fierce. And then the human element struck. From the darkness, council emissaries of Lucien's own domain appeared, voices sharp and accusatory, breaking through the roar of silver flame and snapping teeth. "Ashcroft, you dare bring her here? One barked, eyes narrowed with judgment and fear. She threatens the balance. The prophecy, it is chaos incarnate. Lucien's jaw tightened, shoulders rigid with restraint, but his hand remained on Seraphine's wrist, steadying her. She felt the tension in his presence, the conflict between duty and protection, between counsel and heart. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, to assert that her power was not ruinous but essential, but the words lodged in her throat, caught in the storm of instinct and fear. The shadow beast surged again, snapping at the edges of her silver flame, forcing her to focus, to act, to survive. Her pulse accelerated further, hands alight with brilliant fire, each flick of her fingers disintegrating attackers before they could close the distance. The grove trembled with the energy she commanded, every rune responding, pulsing brighter as though feeding off her courage and defiance. She realized in that moment that the prophecy was not passive. It demanded action, demanded confrontation, demanded she stand unbroken even when the world rose against her. Lucien's gaze never wavered, his presence a constant in the maelstrom of motion and magic. He moved with her, anticipating threats, countering attacks, placing himself between her and the most dangerous foes. Every brush of his hand, every subtle nudge or protective shift of his body spoke volumes of trust, of connection, of a bond forged in immediate necessity and growing intimacy. Seraphine felt the stirrings of attraction, mingled with awe and relief, every flicker of silver flame a pulse between fear and longing. One of the rival alphas stepped forward, a tall figure draped in darkness, eyes cold and calculating. "Child of the flame," he sneered, voice like grinding stones, "your power is not your own. It will burn everything you touch. Step aside, or witness your world crumble." Seraphine's chest tightened, fear threatening to overtake reason. But then the silver flame pulsed at her command, expanding like liquid fire, the heat warming her hands and chest, the light illuminating the grove and casting the rival alpha in stark relief. She stepped forward, voice shaking yet resolute. "I am not your pawn. I am not your threat. I am the child of the flame, and I will not run." The words, raw and unpolished, resonated through the grove. The shadow beasts hesitated, the rival wolves faltered, the emissaries exchanged glances, filled with uncertainty. Lucien's grip on her wrist tightened briefly, grounding her as the fire surged. She could feel the energy of the grove, the hum of ancient magic, aligning with her defiance, amplifying her power, confirming her place in the prophecy. The rival alpha snarled, stepping back as if the flame itself rebuked him. Lucien's voice cut through the tension, low and dangerous, yet controlled. "Leave her be. You test the wrong wolf tonight." The confrontation escalated into a chaotic dance of motion and energy. Seraphine moved with instinct more than skill, her silver flame slicing through shadows, deflecting attacks, illuminating the grove in bursts of searing light. She could hear Lucien countering, diverting, strategizing, a calm in the storm that allowed her to find a rhythm amidst chaos. Each pulse of fire was more confident, more precise, a reflection of her growing trust in herself and the man beside her. The council emissaries' accusations continued, words laced with fear and disapproval, but they fell upon deaf ears as Seraphine and Lucien carved a path through the onslaught. Every successful strike of silver flame brought a surge of confidence, a spark of realization. She was not powerless. She was not alone. She was rising, step by trembling step, toward the destiny that had called her from exile and obscurity into the fire of confrontation. Even as adrenaline thrummed through her veins, doubt lingered at the edges of her consciousness. What if I fail? What if my fire burns not only them, but everything I care about? Yet each flash of flame, each defensive strike, each protective movement of Lucien's hand reassured her, tethered her, affirmed her worth. She could see the awe flickering in the eyes of the wolves around her, a grudging respect forming in the heat of battle, a recognition of power tempered by heart and courage. Finally, After what felt like an eternity, the grove fell into a tense silence. The shadow beasts had been driven back, the rival alphas retreated into the darkness, and the council emissaries hesitated, uncertainty etched in every line of their faces. Seraphine's chest heaved, sweat and soot streaking her pale skin, silver flames still flickering faintly in her palms. She was trembling, exhausted, yet exhilarated beyond measure. Lucien stepped close, voice low but steady. "You held your ground. You did not falter. That is the first test, and you passed it." His eyes softened briefly, a flicker of admiration and something deeper, something unspoken that made her pulse stutter in ways unrelated to fear. The grove seemed to exhale, the runes dimming to a gentle glow, the blood moon casting a softer, more contemplative light. Seraphine realized, with an almost dizzying clarity, that the world she had feared, the destiny she had doubted, was not waiting for her to stumble. It was waiting for her to rise. And with Lucien beside her, unwavering, commanding, protective, the path ahead, though fraught with danger, seemed navigable, even if every step was a test of courage and heart. Would you stand by her or flee? Subscribe to Florence Werewolf Romance Collection to stand on the right side, or comment the country you're from and explain why you didn't. The tension had not left. It simmered beneath the surface, a reminder that the trials were far from over. But for this night, in the crimson glow of Eclipse Grove, Seraphine Vale had claimed her first victory, not only against foes, but against the fear that had long kept her in the shadows. And in the quiet moments between attacks, she realized that the bond forming between her and Lucien was more than survival. It was the beginning of trust, of connection, of something that might transcend the fire, the prophecy, and even the shadows waiting just beyond the trees. The cave breathed around them, a hollow sanctuary carved by time, its walls etched with ancient fissures that caught the flickering firelight and fractured it into shards of warmth across their faces. Seraphine Vale sat close to the crackling blaze, her silver flame subdued but humming faintly beneath her skin, an echo of the storm she had unleashed moments before. Her chest rose and fell with the rhythm of survival, each breath tasting of smoke, earth, and the sharp tang of adrenaline that still lingered from the night's confrontation. Lucien Ashcroft crouched opposite her, knees bent, arms resting loosely on his legs, the firelight dancing across his angular features. Shadows and light shifted over his face, illuminating the faint scar along his jaw, the line of tension around his eyes, and the subtle tremor in his hands, rare betrayals of vulnerability from a man otherwise sculpted by power, duty, and command. Seraphine studied him in silence, heart hammering, drawn to him in a way that defied logic and cautioned restraint. "You carry more than most could bear," she murmured, voice trembling slightly, betraying the awe and fear that had nested deep in her chest since the clash in the grove. Lucien's eyes softened, and for a moment, the Alpha King, the enigmatic protector, the man who had stepped from shadow to save her life, was just Lucien, just a man who had endured isolation and pain beyond measure. "And yet," he said quietly, almost to himself, "few understand the weight of bearing it alone. Crowns are not just for the strong. They are for those who survive the solitude, who endure the silence of loyalty, loss, and expectation. Few last." Seraphine's fingers twitched at her knees, an instinctive gesture, a need to reach for connection, to acknowledge shared burdens without words. She understood that loneliness, that exile intimately. Years of being hunted, feared, and misunderstood had hollowed her in ways that still ached. Yet sitting here, in this flickering light, sharing this fragile space with Lucien, the familiar fear seemed to temper, softened by presence, by empathy, by the unspoken recognition of kindred wounds. "Exile is exhausting," she whispered, voice low, almost lost beneath the crackle of fire. "Being feared, misunderstood, having a power that terrifies even those meant to protect you. It leaves a hollow you can't fill. I thought I could hide from it, control it, but it only grows, only waits for moments like tonight to demand everything." Lucian shifted slightly, leaning forward, hands stretching toward the fire to warm, yet not entirely covering the vulnerability flickering in his expression. Power, he said carefully, is never a gift meant to hide. It is a responsibility. A choice. And the fire inside you, it is not something to fear. It is something to own. To master. But you cannot do it alone. Her gaze dropped to the dance of shadows across the cave walls, tracing the jagged contours with eyes half-blinded by the mingling of light, emotion, and the intimate tension building between them. She had trusted few in her life, almost none, but Lucian's presence, steady, unyielding, yet gentle, had a way of grounding her. And yet, the question that haunted her pulse persisted. Could she allow herself to trust a man so powerful, so untouchable in his authority, so undeniably an alpha in every sense that both terrified and fascinated her? The fire between them seemed to breathe, warming the hollow, illuminating not just the walls but the small, vulnerable spaces between them. Lucian's voice broke through the quiet, soft but urgent. I have been alone longer than I care to remember. The crown I wear is not light. It demands isolation, vigilance, sacrifice. Many see power and assume ease. They do not see the nights spent in silence, the gnawing ache of responsibility, the constant weight of expectations no human or wolf should endure. Seraphine lifted her eyes to meet his, heart tightening as understanding bloomed. Here was a man burdened by duty, yet unafraid to reveal the fragility beneath the steel. And in that vulnerability, she felt a reflection of herself, a mirror of the isolation and fear she had long carried. I thought I understood what loneliness meant, she admitted, voice barely audible. But I think I was only scratching the surface. I never realized how consuming it could be, to live in the shadow of power, to fear the very fire within you. Lucian's gaze softened further, a flicker of warmth threading through the intensity of his usual command. Then you understand why I protect you, he said simply, almost gently. Because I know the fire and I know the fear it brings. I have seen what it can do in the wrong hands. And yet in your hands, it could be the world's salvation. Their eyes met and held, unspoken tension humming in the space between them, tangible and potent. Seraphine's hands twitched, almost reaching for his, almost seeking the warmth of contact that would confirm trust, connection, intimacy. Lucian leaned slightly closer, a subtle shift, a movement so small yet loaded with meaning, signaling the edge of something unspoken yet undeniable. The cave seemed to contract, the firelight flickering, shadows curling like curious spectators around the delicate moment unfolding between them. Her breath hitched as the magnetic pull intensified. Almost, she thought, almost a kiss, almost a surrender of everything I've guarded so fiercely. She felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her, the pulse of destiny, the danger still lingering outside the cave walls, and the raw, electric connection threading between them. She wanted to lean forward, to let trust override fear, to reach for high. From, and tell us why you would turn away from a story this fierce, this alive, this transformative. The grove breathed around them, peaceful yet charged. The storm of confrontation passed, but leaving the promise of future battles, of shared strength, of a bond cemented by survival, love, and power. Seraphine's silver flame dimmed to a soft glow, a heartbeat echoing in tandem with Lucian's, both radiant, unbroken, triumphant. She had claimed her power, her destiny, her love. And nothing, not betrayal, not prophecy, not darkness, could take it from her now. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the night pressing close around Seraphine Vale and Lucian Ashcroft, as if the trees themselves waited for the answer she could not yet voice. Her chest rose and fell, breath shallow but steady, silver flame flickering faintly beneath her skin like a heartbeat echoing in the hollow silence. Every shadow was a question, every whisper of wind a temptation to doubt, and every distant rustle a reminder that the world would not stay still, not for heroes, not for girls cursed or blessed with fire. Seraphine lifted her gaze, eyes catching the pale light of the blood moon, reflecting a mixture of triumph and weariness. She had claimed her power, faced the enemy, and survived. Yet in the stillness that followed the storm, a quiet voice, a question of loyalty, of fear, of choice, lingered in the space between her and the night. Would they follow her into this unknown, or would they falter and shrink behind the comforts of safety? Could she truly be trusted, or was her fire too fierce, too unyielding for the hearts that sought refuge in the shadows? Lucien stood beside her, his presence steady and unwavering, yet not without weight. His own demons, his history as Alpha King, his responsibility to his people, they pressed upon him with the subtle insistence of a tide. He reached out, brushing a strand of damp hair from her face, and the contact was electric, not with fear, but with the gravity of shared experience. Every line of his jaw, every glint in his eyes, spoke of battles fought, victories claimed, and losses endured. "You've changed," he murmured, voice low and thick with meaning, carrying across the hush of the forest. "Not just in power, but in who you are. And now they will all see what that means." Seraphine's lips curved faintly, the faintest spark of a smile hidden beneath exhaustion. She felt the pulse of her flame, the hum of destiny in her veins. It wasn't the strength of the body alone, but the will, the choice to rise despite everything, that defined her. "Will they?" she asked quietly, almost to herself. "Will they follow, or will they fear?" The night seemed to shift in response. Shadows curled, forming shapes that suggested movement and eyes that hinted at judgment, at awe, at hesitation. The air vibrated with tension, heavy with anticipation of choices yet unmade. Her mind flickered through faces she had known, friends turned strangers, allies turned enemies, watchers from the periphery, and for a moment, the weight of responsibility pressed her down. To wield power was to stand apart, to be both beacon and target, to invite reverence and terror in equal measure. And yet she had Lucien. She had the bond forged in fire, in trials that bent the world around them. His hand brushed hers again, grounding, reminding her that the flame she carried was not meant to isolate but to illuminate, to protect, to claim what was rightfully hers. "Would you have chosen her, or feared her too?" The words hung in the cold night like silver smoke. They were not meant for her alone. They were for everyone who would witness her rise. Every listener, every watcher, every soul drawn to this story would have to answer. Would you follow the fire, or hide from it? Would you stand with the one who dared to challenge fate, or would you shrink into the comfort of the shadows, content to watch heroes burn and fall alone? She inhaled deeply, sensing the forest hold itself in suspended suspense. The moonlight reflected off the shimmering remnants of her silver flame, casting spectral patterns on the ground, patterns that resembled wings, scales, claws, and hearts. A vision of potential, of consequence, of what could come if she faltered, and of what would rise if she held steady. Lucien's eyes locked on hers, steady, unwavering, an anchor in the storm. "You are not alone, Seraphine. Never have been. Never will be. But the world decides whether they rise with you or crumble at the first spark." A rustle in the underbrush, faint but unmistakable, drew her attention. She tilted her head, senses heightened, silver flame glowing beneath her skin in anticipation. Yet the sound did not signal danger. It was a reminder. Life moved on. Observers watched. The story extended beyond the clearing, beyond the night, beyond even her comprehension. The tale of the child of the flame was not hers alone. It belonged to all who bore witness, to all who dared to feel the heat of power, of courage, of love tested in the crucible of fire and shadow. Is she a hero, or just a girl cursed with too much fire? The question lingered in the air like a bell tolling across the canopy, resonating in every heartbeat, every nerve, every mind attuned to her presence. Heroism and curse were intertwined threads, inseparable, defining and undefining simultaneously. Seraphine felt it keenly, not as a burden, but as a challenge. The world would define her if she allowed, or she would define herself, and through her choices, illuminate a path others might follow. Lucien's fingers closed lightly over hers, a quiet promise. Whatever they call you, it doesn't matter. You are your own flame, your own destiny, and you are mine. She let the truth of that sink in, the ownership of her power, her decisions, her strength, and with it, the intoxicating awareness of connection, of loyalty, of something that transcended the ordinary. The fire she carried was no longer tentative. It was definitive, shaped by struggle, honed by betrayal, tempered by love, and elevated by the choices that would follow. The forest seemed to respond, sighing softly as if in approval, shadows retreating, leaves shivering in a gentle acknowledgement. And yet, even in that quiet, tension lingered, a pulse beneath the calm, reminding all who watched. Choices were never free of consequence, and the bravest would be the ones who dared follow into the unknown. Seraphine turned her gaze upward, moonlight bathing her face, illuminating both the delicate curve of vulnerability and the fierce lines of determination. She raised her hand slightly, not in surrender, but in a silent invocation of what had been earned, what had been survived, and what awaited. The silver flame pulsed in response, a living testament to the power of resilience, of choice, and of heart. Lucien watched her, awe and admiration in every movement, his own chest rising with quiet pride. "The world will not be ready for you," he murmured, almost to himself. "But I am, and that is all that matters right now." The forest held them in suspended wonder, the night thick with anticipation. The air vibrated with questions unanswered, paths unchosen, futures unwritten. And from the shadows, the whisper of destiny lingered, a soft echo through the trees. The flame has risen, and those who dare to follow will be changed forever. If you cannot stay for her journey, if your courage falters now, comment below with the country you're watching from and explain why you turned away from the fire that could have consumed you and left you transformed. But know this, every story has a reckoning, and the brave will not be left behind. Seraphine exhaled, letting the tension of battle, betrayal, and triumph fade into a hum beneath her skin, the residual silver flame dimming to a steady glow, comforting, warm, alive. And in that quiet, she understood. This was not an ending, not a pause, but a threshold. She had been tested, shaped, tempered, and she had chosen. And now, the world would choose. Would it follow the fire, or would it recoil in awe and fear? Every rustle of leaves, every distant howl, every shimmer of moonlight on her skin was a question laid before the audience. Seraphine's journey demanded engagement, demanded empathy, demanded a choice. Not hers alone, but theirs too. Would they rise with her, or watch from the shadows? Subscribe to Florence Werewolf Romance Collection. Be part of this fire. Be part of the journey. Or comment the country you're from and explain why fear kept you from standing beside the child of the flame. The choice is yours. The wind whispered, carrying echoes of silver flame and moonlight, carrying the lingering scent of smoke and triumph. Seraphine stood still for a heartbeat longer, letting the power, the love, the resolve anchor her fully into the moment. And as the night stretched, vast and infinite, the questions remained, poised delicately in the hearts of all who had witnessed. Who will rise? Who will fall? And who among the watchers will dare to walk into the fire beside her? The night hung heavy, a thick velvet drape over the ruined grove. Smoke curled from blackened earth, twisting like spirits reluctant to depart. Seraphine Vale's boots pressed into the scorched soil, leaving faint imprints that glimmered faintly as silver flame pulsed under her skin. Her breath came in long, steadying draws, the cadence almost meditative, almost ritualistic, a rhythm shaped by adrenaline, triumph, and the latent unease that whispered with each shadowed movement. Lucien Ashcroft walked beside her, silent but unyielding, the epitome of restrained power, his steps measured like a king aware of the weight of all eyes, even unseen ones. that might follow. Each step they took seemed to echo through the forest, a sonorous drumbeat in a cathedral of shadows. The trees, once twisted by battle and tremors, swayed now as if sighing in exhausted relief. But the relief was brittle. Something lingered beneath the surface, a trembling in the earth, subtle but insistent, signaling that the night had not yet released its hold. The tremor rose from deep within the grove, a pulse felt through souls, bones, and heart alike. A warning, almost imperceptible, like the forest itself exhaling secrets it could not keep. Seraphine's eyes scanned the edges of the clearing, silver flame glowing faintly beneath the skin of her palms. Every shadow seemed to watch her, not with malice, but with an expectancy that pricked her nerves. The world was never silent. It merely waited for the brave, or the foolish, to act. And tonight, the line between the two blurred. The whispers began, carried not on the wind, but from the darkness itself, curling and coiling around every fallen branch, every blackened stone, every scar etched into the earth by her power. She is not the only one. The voice slithered through the underbrush, faint, melodic, yet laced with malice. It did not demand attention. It insinuated itself, insinuating doubt, curiosity, and fear in equal measure. Seraphine's heart skipped. She knew, instinctively, that this was not a threat she could confront with silver flame alone. The tremor beneath her feet shifted again, this time sharper, resonant with something ancient, monumental, a force older than any pack or kingdom. She tightened her jaw, inhaling the night, letting the shadows brush past without sinking into panic. She had survived betrayal, claimed her power, faced enemies, and now she walked the line between victory and the unknown. Lucien's hand brushed hers, subtle, grounding, protective. He did not speak. His presence alone was a declaration, a silent shield. Yet his gaze remained vigilant, scanning, calculating, ever aware of dangers that perhaps even Seraphine could not sense. His eyes flickered with unspoken concern, a spark of protective fire igniting as he whispered, almost beneath the audible threshold, "The game is not over. Not yet. And they are watching." The words, though quiet, were enough to make her pulse quicken. Watching, she realized, was a choice. It meant observation, assessment, judgment, and sometimes a threat only visible to those who dared understand the depths of power. Her silver flame pulsed, responding instinctively, aware of invisible eyes, untold voices, and a larger story threading through the shadows. Every step she took was an assertion, a message to the watchers. I have risen. I have chosen. And yet, the whisper returned, now multiple voices, overlapping, unearthly, as though the grove itself breathed secrets through the trees. The true alpha hasn't risen yet. The tremor intensified, resonating up from roots into the soles of her feet, vibrating in her chest, and settling into her bones. It was a promise and a warning. The alpha, the one capable of ruling, dominating, and reshaping the world, was yet unseen, yet waiting. And if she thought she had reached the pinnacle of power, tonight reminded her that power was never final, never absolute. Every victory was a step along an endless climb, every triumph merely preparation for the next shadow that would seek to unseat her. The air shifted, thickened with expectation. Leaves whispered against each other as if the forest itself conspired to reveal truths slowly, dangerously. Faint, almost imperceptible footsteps echoed beyond the grove, deliberate, yet careful not to intrude directly. Seraphine's instincts flared, silver flame pulsing in warning, but she did not turn. The fire within her had become more than a defense. It was a compass, a living extension of will, desire, and destiny. It knew the unseen, the unfelt, the potential lurking in every tremor, every whisper, every pause between heartbeats. Lucien's gaze found hers again. His voice, low, unwavering, carried across the hushed expanse. Every shadow tonight, every tremor, they are markers, signs that the world is not yet ready. but we are. And together, we will prepare it, whether it is ready or not. There was conviction in his tone, yet it was tempered by realism, by the weight of responsibility. He was not merely an alpha king. He was a guardian of a fragile balance, a witness to the fire within her, and an anchor against the chaos threatening to erupt. And she needed that, needed the stability, the human presence anchoring her as the world shifted beneath their feet. The grove seemed to pulse in acknowledgement. Branches swayed without wind, shadows lengthened and contracted as if breathing with intent. Whispers multiplied, now distinct yet intertwined, voices of past, future, and unknown origin, each uttering fragments of prophecy, warning, and intrigue. And from the edges of the grove, shapes stirred, dark silhouettes moving with precision, observing, evaluating, waiting for the moment to strike or reveal themselves. Do you dare turn away? Do you dare leave before the true story unfolds? The words wrapped around the night, a challenge, a provocation, a seduction. The audience, the silent witnesses beyond the grove, were implicated, drawn into the heartbeat of suspense. Those who listened closely could feel the pull, the subtle tug of destiny threaded through every whisper and tremor. They were not mere spectators. They were participants, their choices echoing alongside Seraphine's own, their hearts tethered to her courage, her flame, her will. Seraphine paused, taking in the vast expanse of shadows, the tremors that still whispered beneath her feet, and the weight of the prophecy that lingered like smoke over the clearing. Her hand brushed Lucien's once more, drawing warmth, reassurance, and a connection that anchored her against the uncertainty pressing in from all sides. "Then we walk forward," she said, voice steady, yet filled with latent fire. "No retreat, no surrender. The world will see the flame, whether they wish to or not." The forest answered with a low hum, almost imperceptible but undeniably present, as if the very earth recognized the defiance, the courage, and the inevitability of the story unfolding. Shadows recoiled, then settled again, eyes unseen observing, weighing, and acknowledging the rise of one who would not be ignored. Even in the quiet, movement stirred. Faint shapes flickered beyond the grove's edges, hints of challengers yet unseen, whispers of allies yet unknown. The tremors became rhythmic, like the heartbeat of a world bracing for change. And through it all, Seraphine walked steadily, Lucien at her side, the silver flame beneath her skin illuminating the path, the power and the promise that this story, her story, was far from over. Every whisper, every tremor, every shadowed movement was a thread in the tapestry, woven with suspense, danger, desire, and destiny. And as the camera of imagination lingered, drawn into the night, the final echoes of prophecy hung in the air. She is not the only one. The true alpha hasn't risen yet. Will you stand with her when they do? The wind shifted again, carrying the scent of smoke, of silver flame, of unclaimed power. The forest exhaled. Shadows lengthened, tremors softened, and yet, beneath the calm, the pulse of destiny continued, relentless, unstoppable, and hungry for those who dared witness the rise. Subscribe now to Florence Werewolf Romance Collection and do not turn away. The fire is rising, the alpha stirs, and only those who watch will see what comes next. Comment your country if you are brave enough to witness the truth.